Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to another episode of Love and Abuse. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being. And always pick your battles wisely. Alright, I am so glad that you are here today. And if you've been a subscriber for a while, you may have noticed there's a big gap between this episode and the last episode. That's because I was on vacation and I didn't really have time to make one, so I am glad to be back, and I'm hoping to start doing this more regularly again. But I am here, and we are going to go through some stuff today. In fact, I'm going to give you a description of a relationship starting, and I want you to maybe compare it to any relationship that you've had in your life, or one that you're in now or just starting now. I want you to listen to this and tell me what you think. The beginning. It may be moving faster than your average relationship. One person is highly empathetic. The other is extremely accommodating and adaptable. Everything you want to do in your life, they support. Every decision you make, they're behind you 100%. They tell you everything that you want to hear. They may even have a victim story that pulls on your heartstrings. You're compassionate and empathetic for them at a deep level. You just want to hold them so they can cry in your arms. What does this describe to you? This is my question to you. What did that setup describe to you? Some might hear that and go, that sounds like the perfect relationship. That sounds great. You know, they may not like the idea that it moves faster, but everything else seems to fit in. It seems to align. So I'm digging it. And I get that if that's what you're feeling. Other people hearing this might think, that's exactly how my emotionally abusive relationship started. That's how it happened. I was highly empathetic and they were extremely accommodating and adaptable. Everything I wanted to do in my life, they supported. Every decision I made, they were behind 100%. And they told me everything I wanted to hear. And yes, they had a rough childhood and a rough upbringing, and I felt really bad for them, and I felt sympathy, and I just wanted to hold them so they can cry in my arms. I was compassionate and empathetic for them at the deepest level. And then some time went by, and not a lot of time, just maybe a few months, and things started shifting. They suddenly weren't behind you 100%. They suddenly didn't support your decisions. They were no longer accommodating and adaptable. And they didn't really tell you everything you wanted to hear at that point. And in that space of seeing these little changes, you find yourself questioning not them, but you. And that's something that I really want you to be aware of, because that's what happens. When the toxic relationship starts, you find yourself questioning yourself. There are some people that will think, well, what did they do and how are they doing it? And I'm going to get to the bottom of this and reveal it to them. And when that happens and you reveal it, they reveal to you how it's still your fault. You're still responsible. You should feel guilty. You should feel bad because you're the one causing this. This is what happens in the emotionally abusive relationship, is that everything starts off as perfect as it could be. And then it slowly starts to shift. And this is why it's so hard to avoid some emotionally abusive people. Some people, they know how to put on the charm. They know how to tell you exactly what you want to hear. They know how to do everything to make you feel comfortable, safe, warm, trusting, loving, and connected. It sounds hopeless. I know. I'm painting a picture that makes you think that there's just no hope, because if that's how a good relationship starts too, how can I avoid a bad one? The idea is to see these things as orange flags. See them as possible signs that something might not be right. Doesn't mean that it won't be right. Sometimes you'll have a relationship start like this and everything will turn out great. Except I'm going to give you things to look for. And we're going to talk about each one of these components that make up what could be an emotionally abusive relationship versus what could be an authentic, happy, fun relationship. And when you know the difference, you don't get into it, and you can watch out for it, and you can be careful about it so that you don't get into it either again or ever. I don't want you to get into a bad situation. I mean, one of the things right off, and I don't even have this written down, I might, but one of the things right off is when you start questioning yourself. It's something I already said. You're starting to question and doubt yourself. This is a really big flag to watch out for. I really want you to be cognizant of the moment you start questioning yourself. You know what I mean? Is it me? Am I doing this? Did I say something wrong? That's a huge flag right there. Yes, it happens in normal relationships too, but it happens 1,000% more in emotionally abusive relationships. It's going to happen in, quote, normal relationships much less often. Because a normal, healthy relationship, there's going to be honest communication. There's going to be give and take. There's going to be a fair interaction. But a manipulative or emotionally abusive, or worse, a narcissistic relationship where you're dealing with somebody who has less empathy or no empathy, what you're going to end up with is self-doubt, and you're going to continue questioning yourself and asking yourself, what did I do wrong? Or how could I have done that differently? Or if you're doubting that it is you, you're still going to ask yourself questions. Well, is it something I did? Is this something that I caused? I tell you what, in a, quote, normal, healthy relationship, I can't imagine you ever saying that more than, I don't know, once or twice a year. If you say, did I do this? Did I cause this? Because the conversations are going to be clear. The communication is going to be honest. It's going to be transparent for the most part. I mean, people still get defensive. Even emotionally healthy people that don't mean to be toxic, they still get defensive. They can still put their guard up and say mean things and do mean things, but it doesn't mean that it's always like that. And usually the follow-up is a conversation and connection and maybe even forgiveness. Not always, but hopefully there's some sense of moving on and closure. Normal, healthy relationships have closure, at least with particular challenging times. When you're going through a challenging conversation, or somebody feels wronged and you have to deal with each other and figure it out, then there's usually some sort of closure. There's usually some sort of moving on. The emotionally abusive relationship, the moving on part never happens. It's rare. And when it happens, it usually leaves behind a residue. Emotional abuse leaves a residue. That's a good way to put it, I think. It's like a toxic substance in your mind and in your body. And it leaves behind this feeling that you can't get rid of, and you're not sure what to do about it. Because when you have conversations with the hurtful person, you still feel the residue. You still feel the lingering toxic effect of their manipulation or abusive behavior. And I'm not saying it's all conscious. I'm not saying they're always doing it on purpose. I know a lot of people that are going through my Healed Being program that didn't know they were doing it. They learned that they were abusive, and now they're changing. They're trying to change. They're working on stuff, but they didn't know they were doing it. So I don't come on here and say, hey, these people are bad, stay away from them. Although you might have to stay away from certain people that do it consciously, but there are those that don't know. And so when you experience these changes near the beginning of the relationship and you start doubting yourself and start questioning yourself, I want you to be aware that that is a huge flag. I just say flag. It could be a red flag. It could be an orange flag, but it's pretty close to in between, if not more red than orange. So what you want to do with that is take a note in your head and say, I am starting to question myself more and more. I'm starting to doubt myself more and more. What does that mean? That means something else might be going on. I can't say this with 100% certainty that when you start questioning yourself, it's emotional abuse, but I can say with high certainty that that is often what happens near the beginning of a relationship that contains abusive behavior. So be on the lookout for that if you are starting a relationship, if you started doing that yourself recently or have been doing that ever since it started. But notice the toxic lingering effect inside of you. It's that feeling you just can't get rid of. It's that lack of closure. It's that buildup that happens when you start questioning yourself over and over again, when you feel blamed, when you feel guilty, when they keep pointing the finger at you and they make perfect sense, because this is often what happens. Part of manipulating you is making perfect sense in what they say. And some believe it and some do it on purpose. But regardless if they're conscious of it or unconscious of it, you don't deserve that behavior. You deserve somebody who's transparent, who is clear, direct, honest, and, at least is willing to talk about it, even when they don't know they're doing it. They're hopefully open-minded enough to figure things out with you. Because if you say, every time we have this conversation, I feel guilty afterward, and I don't like that feeling, and I don't know if you're doing it on purpose or not, but I feel like you're making me responsible for all the problems that we're having every time. If you said something like that and they said, well, you are causing a lot of problems and I do think you're responsible, but they are willing to talk about it, then I can understand that might be a defensive posture. But if they're open to it and they say, all right, well, give me an example. Let's just talk about this and see where we can get. And I'm being highly reasonable in my role playing here, but I'm hoping that you get some sort of open-minded response like that. Like, all right, give me some examples and let's see what you mean. I'm not sure what you mean. More likely than not, you'll get a response like, well, yes, everything is your fault. Everything that's happening is your fault. I'm not doing anything wrong. Do you see me doing anything wrong? Can you point out exactly what I'm doing wrong? And more likely than not, you won't be able to point it out because their manipulation, their behavior is meant to hide what they're doing and meant to conceal their bad behavior. And they do so in a way where it's ambiguous enough that you can't point out a specific detail. Sometimes you can, especially if you've been listening to the show. I've been giving you the specific details so that you can say, hey, you're doing it right now. Right now, you're doing it right now. This is exactly what I'm talking about. But the more clever they are, the more they're going to bury you with reasoning and, quote, rationality. They're going to make you look crazy while they come out on top. They come out the smart one, the winner, and you have to deal with your own stuff yourself, and you need to go to therapy, and you just need to take care of yourself because they're perfectly fine. That's not the way a relationship works. It's not equal. It's not fair. It's not open, honest, open-minded communication, and it needs to be. both people need to be open-minded and communicative and honest and just share what's going on inside of them. I remember one of my healed being lessons talks about how a lot of emotional abuse is based on lies. I don't mean lying to you, and this is what it said in the lesson. I don't mean the person says, hey, how did this dent get in my car? And the emotionally abusive person says, I don't know how it got in the car, even though they do know. I'm not talking about that kind of lie. I'm talking about the kind of lie inside of them that they haven't addressed at a deeper emotional level yet. For example, I don't know if I gave this example in the lesson or not, but I talked about how when I was younger, my stepfather was very scary to be around because he was an alcoholic and he was abusive and he was violent. And I didn't want to feel any of his wrath. I didn't want to be near him when he drank. So he was very scary to be around. And because of his behavior and because of how my mom, she enabled a lot of this behavior, not purposefully, but he was an alcoholic, so she was the enabler and the people pleaser and tried to avoid situations and calm things down. So I learned a lot of people-pleasing ways from her, probably all of my people-pleasing ways from her. And I also learned not to honor my boundaries. And because of that, I had to learn other ways to enforce my boundaries. And those ways became manipulations. When you don't have appropriate coping skills and a functional way to honor yourself and honor your boundaries, which is telling the world what's acceptable and what's not, then what you end up doing, typically when you're a child, you end up making up ways to honor yourself. So a lot of my previous behavior in my previous relationships was based on my inability to honor my boundaries in a healthy way. And so instead of being honest about my personal boundaries or just expressing them to someone saying, hey, I'm not really interested in that, or I don't want to do that, or just the word no, instead of doing that, I would make something up. I would find a way to manipulate. There would be something that I didn't want to address inside myself. So my emotionally abusive behavior was based on the inability to be honest about what's really going on inside of me. A good example of that is when I became angry inside of me and I felt the anger, but I chose not to express that anger. And instead of expressing the anger, what I would do instead is be passive aggressive. I would say things or do things to try to make them feel bad, whoever I was with, so that they would stop doing the things that made me angry. It was a lie. This is how most emotionally abusive behavior starts. Instead of saying what's truly on our mind, we make something up that's not about what's on our mind. And so the behavior is actually stemming from something true inside the person, but they lie about what's true inside of them and turn it into a manipulation or emotionally abusive behavior, mainly because they don't want to deal with that truth inside of them. So that's what I mean when I talk about how almost all emotional abuse is based on a lie, which is a truth inside the person they don't want to reveal. The exposure of that truth makes them super vulnerable. And that is a very scary place for a lot of toxic people, because if they're emotionally vulnerable, they feel like they're going to lose their power. They feel like they're going to be hurt. They don't have any good coping skills for being hurt, or they don't have a lot of them. And on. There's a lot of reasons somebody doesn't want to be transparent or vulnerable with other people, mainly because they feel unsafe. And so that lie that begins from a truth inside of them that subsequently grows into emotionally abusive behavior and continues to expand into the relationship in many ways. The origin of all this behavior is based on something that they don't want you to see. And believe me, you know as well as I do, when somebody wants to hide something, they will do anything they can to hide it. even if it means making you feel bad. And none of what I'm saying is an excuse for their behavior. It's just a reason. It's just what happens when some people are either too afraid to reveal what's going on inside of themselves. They're too afraid to show you something that embarrasses them, or they're ashamed about, or that makes them look weak or stupid or, I don't know, unattractive, on and on. There are some people that can't handle the possible judgment or the possible response or reaction from other people regarding something vulnerable inside of them, so they do something else. Lie, cheat, steal, betray, emotionally abuse, on and on and on and on. And when that happens, of course, you suffer. You deal with the consequences of that. Again, none of this is excusable. My advice to anyone that feels so vulnerable they have to be hurtful to someone else is to take a risk of being hurt yourself by being honest. I mean, that's the path I chose to follow after my marriage, is that I never wanted to be vulnerable, or at least that deeply vulnerable with my wife or any of my previous partners. And so I would be emotionally abusive in different ways. And after my marriage, I realized, oh, I'm choosing to hurt others instead of take on that hurt, which is dealing with my stuff. I'm refusing to take on that hurt myself by taking a risk, by being honest, by expressing myself about what's really going on inside of me. So if I have this fear that comes in and I choose not to express that fear because I'll look weak, I'll look stupid, I'll look whatever, then what happens is the other person suffers because I'm doing other behaviors to hide that fear or insecurity from them and make them focus on themselves instead of me. This is a complex web, I know, and I'm thinking that you're probably aware of some of this already, but if you're not, this is important stuff. It doesn't mean you're going to have the answers and know how to address it with certain people, but when you have the answers, when you have this knowledge, it can help you understand that you really shouldn't question yourself, because we all have to deal with our own stuff. You have to deal with your stuff. I have to deal with my stuff. That means that if you find yourself in a relationship of any sort where you start questioning yourself in a way where you're saying, is it me? Am I doing this? Am I causing the problem? You're most likely not. Because in normal relationships, those kinds of questions don't come up. Again, maybe once a year, maybe less, maybe more, but the pattern of those questions, patterns, emotional abuse is always about patterns. There's always a pattern of something. Even your responses, your reactions, your behaviors, your counter behaviors, if they're always in a pattern, they are usually indicative of another pattern going on. And the pattern might be the emotionally abusive person is doing something over and over and over again to make you question yourself over and over and over again. Look for those patterns. I always feel this way after a conversation. There's a pattern. They always say this about me. There's a pattern. And you look for those patterns and you try to dissect them a little bit and find out what is going on there. What do we need to talk about here? Let's talk about this. You always say that I'm responsible for everything. That, to me, sounds far-fetched. If you get anything but, okay, let's talk about this, I'm open, let's see where we can go with this, maybe you're not always responsible. Maybe I'm responsible too and I'm just not seeing it. If you get anything but that, then it's, of course, tougher. And it's very difficult to do this on your own. So what ends up happening is you find out that you are pretty much alone and you're being put down and you feel hurt and you feel unloved and you feel like you're doing everything you can. You're trying to do the right thing. And all you're getting back is that it's still your fault. There's still a problem. You still need to fix it. Go fix yourself. That's too challenging to do on your own. Relationships are not about me, myself, and I. They are about us. And when you feel like you are the only one, you are the Lone Ranger in the relationship and the other person is saying, it's not me, it's all you, then you're not working together. Almost every challenge that comes along in a relationship, you're supposed to work together on. I mean, almost every challenge. It doesn't have to be every challenge. There are personal challenges that come along, but they usually have to do with something specifically with you. Maybe it's your family. Maybe you're dealing with something at work. I mean, that kind of stuff, yes, that might be something you have to deal with. And hopefully you can get some guidance, or hopefully you can talk to another person in your life and get some feedback, and it's productive feedback, and it's not pointing the finger back at you saying, oh, it's all your fault. Hopefully when people see themselves in the relationship with you, they will realize that your issues, your challenges are also theirs. Because if you show up as unhappy one day, how does that not affect the other person? If the other person can just blissfully go on with their day, regardless of your level of happiness or stress or peace and comfort or fear and insecurity, if they can go on with their day without a problem, when you're experiencing all that, they're not relating to you at all. You're not in a real relationship, and that's a tough thing to say. I don't really mean to just minimize or invalidate anything you're going through now, but I like to look at relationships as something equal that both people put effort into. And when one person's not putting the effort into it anymore and puts it all on you, that is saying something. That tells me that they're really not trying. And I might be wrong about that in some cases. Maybe some people really are trying, and maybe you are a big problem. Maybe you've caused all these challenges, but I can almost guarantee you, if you tuned into this show because you just can't figure out what you're doing wrong in the relationship, then you're probably already doing everything right, or at least as close to right as possible. Usually the person who tries the hardest to make things right and accommodate and apologize and even feel guilty, usually that person is the one that's trying the hardest. And if the other person lets everything just roll off of them, and all the challenges you're having and all the unhappiness or stress or doubt or confusion or fear, if all of that is going on inside of you and you've conveyed that in some way, or you're visibly upset in some way, and it's not bothering them, that's a problem. That's not what a relationship is supposed to be. Where's the investment in working on this together? That's what I like to see, an investment together. And that when you have that investment, when you're both putting your effort into the relationship, it's noticeable. Because then there's a give and take. It's not a scale that's so unbalanced and all the weight is on your side and they're just high in the clouds, not worrying about anything. It's not supposed to be like that. The most normal relationships, and I quote normal because everyone's different, but most normal relationships are supposed to be somewhat balanced with give and take, with highs and lows. And it's typically equal across the board. You have some highs and lows, they have some highs and lows. It's supposed to be that way. That's what happens. Because we're both individuals making us. I'm me, you're you, and now we are us. And when we do that, we bring three aspects together. You bring the best version of yourself, they bring the best version of themselves, and then together you make this single entity that is created from those two parts. And this third part that is created, the relationship itself, is the combination of everything that you put into it. And if somebody stops investing into it, then that third part is heavily listing. It is sinking into the sea, and you're doing everything to keep it afloat. And that is a challenge. So let me just finish this episode by coming back to the beginning, where I said how an emotionally abusive relationship starts can look very similar to how a healthy relationship starts, except you should know what to look for and maybe what to define as an orange flag so that you are aware of when it starts to go south. I already told you that as soon as you start questioning yourself, as soon as you start doubting yourself, and that happens more and more and more, you're already on the path of something that it probably isn't going to turn out too well. unless you are able to talk about it and talk through it, and they say, oh, I don't want that to happen. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't be questioning yourself. We should talk about these things, absolutely. Then maybe you can work it out. But I'm going to read what I wrote down earlier and talked about at the beginning of the episode and go over them one by one. The first one is the relationship moves maybe faster than your average relationship. That, to me, is always a flag. I like to take love slow. I like to go day by day. I like to feel things out. I'm always questioning in my mind, how are things going? Is there anything strange going on? Are there any, what my girlfriend calls glitches? Are there any glitches in this relationship? Does everything seem to be on a good path? The answer might be yes, it's fine. Everything's on a good path. Or there might be little hiccups here and there. Hiccups are allowed in the beginning of a relationship. You're getting to know each other. You're trying to figure things out. But if it's moving fast, then I am careful about that, because what ends up happening, the orange flag, is the manipulative person wants to suck you into that in-love feeling as fast as possible. And so that's what I like to look for, and that's what I want you to look for, is when you feel in love fast, then you're more committed to something that could be or could turn into something toxic. Because being in love doesn't reveal all their nuances and all the behaviors that you haven't seen yet. Being in love is a separate thing. You care about the person, you love being with the person, but you don't know all the behaviors they do and what they're gonna do. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't be. It just means that you want to be in love and be aware if you do fall in love. So if you do fall in love, you also have to allow yourself to feel the pain of losing that love. And I know it's horrible when I say this, but I want you to understand that if you're in love and then you start feeling these doubts and these fears and these concerns, and you're also feeling guilty and responsible for all the problems in the relationship, all those signs of emotional abuse, when you start feeling that, I want you to be okay to say, okay, I'm in love with this person and something doesn't seem right. This is when you might have to question who they are. Doesn't mean you're not in love, but you have to question who they are and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And just think about these things to yourself, and don't let being in love commit you to something long term just because you're in love. It's okay to go forward even in a fast-moving relationship, but you don't have to commit to something as you see more and more signs just because you're in love, and even just because they're in love. That's not the reason to move forward. The reason to move forward is that you're getting respect and kindness and you feel good and there's reciprocal support on both sides and you are just moving forward and everything's going along well and it just feels right. It's just when it stops feeling right, we have to be open to being okay that something isn't right and something needs to be addressed or looked at in a way where we don't just continue down the road just because we're in love. So that's my comment. I'm moving fast in a new relationship. The second one is one person is highly empathetic and the other is extremely accommodating and adaptable. You have to be very careful about extremely accommodating and adaptable people. I know there are people listening right now that are this way because that's who I was for a long time, and mine was mixed in with people pleasing and trying to fix people and trying to rescue people. It was all wanting them to feel better and make their lives better, but I was doing so in a way that continually doted on them, continually tried to make them like me. And when it comes to emotionally abusive behavior, this is often used as a tactic to get you closer and make you feel more connected to them. Because if someone is constantly accommodating and adaptable to you, it's going to feel really good at first. Oh, he or she is willing to do all this stuff with me, and I've never had somebody that wanted to do all this stuff with me. This is amazing. This feels so great. Yet what ends up happening a few months in is they're not so accommodating and adaptable anymore. All of that was spent in the first few months trying to hook you in. This isn't everyone, but most people, that if they're very accommodating and adaptable at first, that will wear off. But most emotionally abusive people at first are accommodating and adaptable. So when you start to see that slipping away, starting to wear down a little bit, that could be a normal relationship transition, but you have to be careful that it doesn't turn into a possessiveness or an isolation, meaning keeping you from family and friends and wanting to do everything with you and them wanting you to do everything with them instead of with other people. That's isolation, trying to keep you away from the things that are important to you, your friends, family, and hobbies, and anything that you want to do, even your kids. And what ends up happening is that the other person really wants to spend the most time with you, and they feel almost as if they've earned it. I spent all this time with you, and I was accommodating and adapting, and so I want you to spend all this time with me. And some of them feel like it needs to be this way from this point on. Like you need to be with them and just them. So you have to watch for the extremely accommodating and adaptable people from the get-go, because that might indicate that they're not showing you their true selves, especially the adaptable part. Oh yeah, I'm adaptable to anything. I mean, I see myself as adaptable, that's true. But there are times where something has come up. Hey, you want to eat some tripe with me? Hey, you want to eat some octopus? I might say, well, no, I don't really want to do that. The highly adaptable person might say, yes, I'll try that. And even a normal, healthy person could say that. Again, you have to be aware about emotional abuse and patterns, and also the pieces of the puzzle that form the big picture. Accommodating and adaptable is one sign of something bigger. And if that has gone on the first few months and they were extremely accommodating and adaptable, and then they stop being that way, and you have these other signs, now you're looking at something that could be more toxic. And this affects especially highly empathetic people. If you're highly empathetic, then it creates a relationship that feels right, but definitely gets sour after time. So that's another way to look at this, is that it can feel so right at first, but then it gets sour. The next one is everything you want to do in your life, they support. I've kind of already talked about this. This is the adaptable part. They're highly supportive, but this ends up changing over time as well as most of these. They end up changing over time. I usually look at the time frame as 2 to 4 months. So if they have been super supportive of everything you're doing, and then by the 3rd month or the 4th month, they're saying, have you thought about changing that? Have you thought about doing something different? When you do that, it makes me worried that you're going to get hurt, so maybe you should do something else, or maybe you should consider something else. They're going to start dropping hints about things that they would rather have you do or not do, so that you start considering other things that they want you to do. And it may be some things that you like, and it may be some things that they like to do, or it may be just some things that keep you closer to them more often, so that they can be near you all the time. I mean, it sounds romantic. I want to be near you all the time, but it's also controlling and possessive. We have to be very careful that it doesn't turn into that. You should feel like you want to be with them more often, but you should also feel like you have the absolute freedom to do anything that you want, within reason, but you do anything that you want to do with your own life and your own time. And when you do it, they go, hey, yeah, go have a good time. That would be more ideal. So everything you want to do in your life, they support. That's another part of this puzzle. The next one is every decision you make, they are behind you 100%. So this is very similar. Everything you want to do in your life, they support. Every decision you make, they're behind you 100%. This is even more prevalent in the very early stages of a relationship. In the very early stages, I remember doing this myself. I remember that some of the people that I dated, near the very beginning, every decision they made, I was totally cool with. I supported them. I say, go for it. And then as time went on, I felt personally left out of those decisions. I felt like if they did those things that I agreed upon in the first place, that it would take their time away from me. So I started trying to wean them out of those things. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to do. I should have supported everything they wanted to do in their life, but I wasn't healthy. I wasn't healthy back then. My definition of love, ever since I've learned about this stuff and I healed from all this hurtful behavior, is supporting the other person's path to happiness, even if I oppose that path or disagree with it. I think that's the best way to love someone. I support you, even if I disagree with it. I'm going to support that path of you, even if you have to leave me. Because if that's what makes you happy, then I don't want you to be unhappy. And if staying with me makes you unhappy, then it's not the right place for you. It is a very, very difficult place to get to for a lot of people. Even the ones with the most unconditionally loving heart, it's still difficult to get to. But I believe it is the healthiest kind of love. It is the most supportive thing you can do for someone. It is a huge gift you can give to someone to say, I want you to do what you want to do. I want you to love whoever you feel like loving. I want you to be with anyone you want to be with. I want you to be anywhere you want to be. Because you know what happens when you love someone like that? They want to be with the person who supports them in that way. That's why this works. It feels like it's not going to work. Like, what? You're going to let her love anyone she wants to love? If I say yes, she's going to want to love me. I mean, that's kind of an egoistic viewpoint, and it may not be true, and I'm not doing it to be manipulative at all. I like to love people that way because if I am genuinely supporting the person I love, that is part of it. Loving someone isn't controlling them. It's not being possessive of them. It's not making them feel bad for being with their friends or doing what they love to do. It's not continuously focusing on them, looking for their faults and pointing out how they're making life bad. It's not doing that at all. It's supporting everything they want to do, and hopefully they want to do it with you. That's where I go with it. I support everything my girlfriend wants to do, and hopefully she wants to do it with me. And I don't mean everything she wants to do with me. I mean, hopefully she wants to live life with me. Hopefully she wants to walk into the sunset holding hands with me. Even though she has her life on that path, I have my life on this path. And we've made this third part, we, us, holding hands, walking into the sunset, hopefully to enjoy our lives together for the rest of our lives. And if she suddenly changes her mind in 5 years and says, I'm falling out of love with you, I'm not going to automatically say, well, okay, let's go find our separate paths. That's not how it works. I think you have to have a conversation about it. What? What's going on? That would be my response. What's going on? What do you mean you're falling out of love? I don't think that would happen in a relationship with open communication, but I think it's important that you have the communication before these things start, because if you're falling out of love with someone, I think that's an important thing to talk about. Like, I'm having these feelings and we need to talk about it. And I used to feel safe around you, but I don't. And I used to trust you and I don't. And I used to feel trusted and I don't. I used to feel loved and I don't. And so I'm having these feelings we need to talk about. And hopefully, like I said, you have someone in your life that says, wow, yes, we do need to talk about that. I don't want you to feel that way. I want you to feel loved. I do love you. So maybe you're not feeling my version of love, which is getting the support you need, even if they disagree with how you live your life. And this is all within reason. I mean, if you're taking a lot of drugs and partying every night, I'm not faulting you for it or judging you for it, but maybe the other person's thinking, wow, this is going to be a very short relationship. He or she's overdosing all the time, and I don't really like that, and I think we need to have a conversation about this. I really can't support that path, Paul. I get it. You know, this is why you talk about this stuff. This is why you communicate. And this is also why you have to be very careful about staying in a relationship just because you're in love. And that is difficult because it's hard to make decisions to be without someone that you're in love with. But it's also harder to stay with someone that you're in love with that keeps hurting you. So let me continue this and finish this list here. The next one is, they tell you everything you want to hear. This is a warning sign. This is something that you have to be very careful of. If you say, I love this restaurant, and they go, I love that restaurant too. And I love that dinner special they advertise all the time. I do too. Oh, I want to go see this movie. I do too. I want to see that movie as well. And then you ask, well, do you like any other movies? And they might say, well, yeah, what movie do you like? And then they'll follow suit. They'll keep being agreeable with you. They'll keep showing you that everything that you like or love, they like or love too. I'm not saying it can't happen, but one little piece of a bigger puzzle that could be emotional abuse. You have to put all the pieces together and decide for yourself, of course, but I'm giving you all the ways to do that. You don't want to hear everything that you want to hear. I used to be highly agreeable with everyone, and I never had my own opinions. This came from a place of insecurity. That's part of my people-pleasing history. I wanted to be liked. I wanted them to think that I could never be angry, and I would never be angry with them, and everything they do is perfect with me, so I'm the perfect person. I'm the perfect partner. And that always backfires. No, when somebody's highly agreeable and telling you everything you want to hear, that might be another component of something bigger that you have to watch out for. All right, 3 more. They may even have a victim story that pulls on your heartstrings. Everyone has suffered. Everyone has gone through something in their life. And sympathetic/empathetic people will resonate, will connect, will hear someone's words when they tell a story of their suffering and connect with their vulnerability as they tell it. And so this can happen in any type of relationship where somebody has a story of suffering. I have a story of suffering. You've probably heard it. The upbringing in my alcoholic home and other things that, my stepfather has put the fear of God into me. So I've had issues, and those issues have come up in my relationships. I don't think I use them as a manipulation, but in a sense, they probably were part of emotionally abusive behavior because I did have a story of suffering. And it's so easy for empathetic, sympathetic people to connect with someone's suffering instead of react or respond to someone's hurtful behavior, because they'll go back to the suffering. Oh, they suffered, therefore I should be more forgiving. Oh, they suffered, so I shouldn't be as hard as I am on them. Oh, they suffered, on and on. We focus on the suffering they had instead of the hurtful behavior they do. And if you can separate that, hey, you suffered, so did I, so did my mom, so did my brother, so did my best friend. We've all suffered. I'm not trying to belittle or invalidate that suffering, but I'm saying that you suffered, but it doesn't give you permission to be hurtful. It doesn't give anyone permission to be hurtful. Suffering is a fact of life. We've all done it, and we all have to deal with it, and some of us have to go to therapy for it, and more power to you. Try to heal it. Try to make your life better, but don't make other people suffer. Don't hurt other people. And this is where it comes in, is that we can't focus on their past trauma. We can only see what they're doing today and what they're saying today, and can't blame their past trauma, even though it could be the cause. Their bad behavior today could be because of their trauma in the past, but we can only respond to what we're experiencing today. And I think when you focus on what's happening today, it's easier to address what's happening instead of focusing on what happened. You know what I'm saying? It's like saying, hey, when you do this, it makes me angry. And if they say, well, I can't help it because, when I was a child, my mom did this and my dad, yelled at me. Yeah, that may have happened, but when you do this today to me, regardless of your past, when you do that, it hurts me. So I want to give you the option to stop hurting me. Will you take that option? Will you stop hurting me? If they don't stop hurting you, then there's a problem. That's a big problem. So don't focus on their past trauma. Yes, you can talk to them about their past trauma. They can confide in you. They can be vulnerable in you, but don't use it as an excuse, and don't let them use it as an excuse to hurt you. That's not how it's supposed to work. And the last one is you're compassionate and empathetic at a deep level. Your compassion and empathy, they'll get you in trouble. I hate to say that because compassion and empathy are supposed to be two of the most wonderful feelings in the world. You should be able to be compassionate for someone and feel empathy for someone. But what ends up happening is we use them a little bit incorrectly sometimes. We can have compassion for someone's past trauma. We can have empathy for what they're going through or what they have gone through. But don't let that translate into being forgiving for the hurtful behavior that you may be receiving. Because we don't want to use our own compassion as a free pass for them to be hurtful. We don't want to feel so much empathy for someone that we allow any level of suffering in our lives just because we feel sorry or we feel like they've gone through a lot. We feel compassion and empathy, like I was saying. Just be careful how you use that and be okay separating your compassion and empathy from reacting or responding from hurtful behavior. And now the last one is, you may just want to hold them so that they can cry in your arms. This is definitely a component of a healthy relationship. Absolutely. It's a big component of a healthy relationship. If you have a partner or a friend or family that you can just hold in your arms while they cry, it shows a lot of trust. It shows a lot of support. It shows a lot of love. We all want to feel love. We all want to feel loved. We want to be happy with other people. And I'm generalizing. I'm sure most people want to feel some sort of connection with others. Doesn't mean it has to be a romantic relationship, but it is nice to have a somewhat glitch-free relationship where love can be felt. And, some people are just looking for something simple. Sometimes a simple relationship is nice. Sometimes it doesn't always have to be so complex. I think that's one of the check boxes in the Mean Workbook. I feel like the relationship is so complex. It shouldn't be so complex. You bring you, they bring them, and then you are together. It gets complex when one of you wants to control or change the other person, and they don't want to be changed, and that's usually when the complexities start. And so one of the paths to stopping emotional abuse is to do exactly everything that somebody else wants you to do. In other words, let them control and change you. We all know that's the key to unhappiness as well. I don't want you to do that. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Love and Abuse. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. If you want to pinpoint the exact behaviors causing the difficulties in your relationship, including identifying all the signs of possible emotional abuse, head over to loveandabuse.com. And if you think of yourself as a hurtful or emotionally abusive person, or you know someone that is open to wanting to change that behavior, head over to healedbeing.com and check out that program as well. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thanks again for joining me. We'll talk again soon.